27th, special council meeting. First thing on the agenda here is approval of bills for payment. Everybody go through them?
I move they be approved as submitted.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Okay, number 2, Chip, Greg Olson from Braun Intertech.
You need to take your mask off when you're talking and talk into the microphone.
Okay,
They can't hear you on Zoom.
okay. Go ahead, Chip.
All right, thank you, Council and Mr. Mayor. As you requested, you had wanted me to pursue Braun Intertech to do a air quality test in the fire hall before we proceed with anything. And we had, I have Greg Olson here on the Zoom call. Greg, if you'd like to maybe review the results with the council here and then maybe answer some questions on how we would look at this moving forward. Mute.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, good. Yeah, again, I'm Greg Olson. I'm Senior Industrial Hygienist with Braun Intertech. As Chip alluded, we had conducted some air sampling for total fungal spores last week. And real quickly, so everybody's on the same page, in terms of the air sampling that was done, again, we looked at total fungal spores, which means it's fragments and active, dead. It's kind of a total collective look at the airborne level of fungal. And in a nutshell, what we do is we always have to collect one outdoor. What we do is compare the total concentration indoors to what we see outdoors at the given day and time. And then the other thing we look at is a relative makeup, and more specifically, the percentage in different types of fungal species we see outdoors at that time versus indoors. We use those two as an overall evaluation, whether or not we've got any elevated conditions inside the building or any flags raised relative to. And just so you guys are clear, there's kind of some misuse of the term mold. You can kind of assume mold and fungal are interchangeable, but technically speaking, we refer to it as fungal because mold is actually a specific type of fungal organism. So when I'm speaking to fungal, if you're more used to the term mold, they can kind of go hand in hand. Real quickly, we ended up taking a total of 6 indoor samples and then the 1 outdoor sample. Since your facility doesn't have mechanical ventilation beyond like a typical forced air furnace, the outdoor sample on the given day was taken outside the facility, and I think it was outside of the garage access to the fire department area. The indoor samples, it included 4 from the north half, which is currently occupied or used by the fire personnel. And then we took 2 down in the south half, which I understand is vacant as the former admin and the police department area. In general, I don't know if everybody got a chance to look at the report yet or not, but the total concentration of fungal spores detected in all 6 of the indoor locations was less than the outdoor concentration. So that's a good thing or a favorable thing. In terms of the relative numbers, the 2 higher concentrations ended up coming up from the south half or the admin and former police department area. In terms of the makeup of the organisms, we didn't see, in summary, any flags raised in the fire department area. We did see some concerns raised with the 2 samples from the south half. And specifically, and as we indicate in the report, one of the things we look for is there any particular, like more prevalent or predominant type of organism indoors compared to outdoors? And that held true in those 2 locations. We found a grouping of Aspergillus penicillium type spores. We also saw what we refer to as Stachybotrys. Those 3 organisms are often associated with potential moisture indicator organisms, which means the facility may have had past or possibly present moisture activity. So that raised a little bit of a flag down there in terms of there might be a potential indoor source of fungal loading beyond what we normally see being brought in through normal outdoor activity. And again, that was confined to the south half of the building. And I'll maybe stop there. I don't know if there's any questions or anybody would like me to further elaborate on those results.
Greg, I got a question for you. On the south
Yes.
south half of the building, the admin building, when you did the testing, obviously you could see where the walls were opened up and the mold was exposed. It was visible, correct?
Yes, and that was shared with us previously. I think down in the southwest quadrant, there was an exploratory opening in one of the sheetrock or gypsum wallboard members down there, and I think around the other corner. And those were still left as is once they were opened up.
So your testing in that whole area did not show real elevated levels even in that condition. Is that correct?
Yes, with respect to the total concentration. Again, what they did show is some indoor source relative to the type and makeup of organisms. The other thing to be careful, and this is something that we always present to clients when they have interest in fungal air sampling. It's my understanding, since this is a non-residency fire response, and we really don't have any routine occupancy no longer on the south half, and people coming and going kind of on the north half. When we have a fungal surface condition, such as we discovered here in a couple of the wall cavities down in that south end, those spores, so that certainly raises one concern. Secondary to that is they have to get kind of physically disturbed or agitated to become airborne and show up in the air samples. And so my point is, you can have a grossly contaminated wall, for instance, and if it's just sitting there idle with not too much disturbance in terms of foot or people activity, or possibly some ventilation interferences or influences, we may not necessarily see it in the air samples.
Well, and as before we tore the wall up, before we opened the wall up and saw the mold there was very little mold in that area. I mean, it was in the wall cavity, undisturbed. So we had two
In terms
tests.
of what you could see on like interior accessible surfaces?
Well, yeah, you could, on some questionable areas. But 2 years ago, we had another indoor air quality test done, and in that admin south of the building, there was very little mold detected at that time. Most of it was in the fire hall portion or the radio room specifically, and the boiler room. So when you took your test in the fire hall, radio room, in the boiler area, were there any elevated levels noticed at the time of your test?
Not in the radio room. One of the rooms we did collect a sample from on the north half.
Okay, I mean, that's kind of odd, huh? Kind of.
Well, like he's saying, I stayed out of the building, so we weren't moving around, so there was no air movement, and that's what he was just talking about. So
Right.
We haven't been in the north or the south side of the building at all. So that's just like you said, air. It's not talking about what's in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
HVAC systems, are they off now? Are they still running?
Oh, they are, so that's moving air around.
I don't know. Maybe in the south end.
Yeah. Okay. Catherine?
I have a question for you. Can that mold be safely removed and be habitable again if, like, where it was at in the lumber was removed and replaced? Would that be a safe environment again? Is that feasible?
Yeah, that's a good question, I guess. So really the best way to answer that, first and foremost, whenever you have a known or assumed moisture problem in the building, which may result in some fungal surface activity, in this case, say like within the wall cavities, before you address the fungal, you really have to eliminate the source. One of the things, for instance, just to give you an example, in the wall cavity, and we'll use the administration area as an example, you've got what appears to be oriented strand board or OSB, kind of similar to a plywood type sheathing with fiberglass bat and vapor barrier, and then the wallboard. Based on some of the photos that were shared with us and what we observed from our field representative that was up there, it appears that there obviously is indeed some fungal activity on the back side of the wallboard, and also along the interior face of the OSB, your exterior sheathing. and the vertical and possibly the bottom or base and top sill plate wood framing as well. To address the fungal, based on the materials, unless you eliminate all those materials, you really want to first off figure out where the water source is and then eliminate that. And then to go back to your question, yes, there are various remediation techniques that can be used to deal with both the moisture, the resultant moisture damage, and the fungal. The one unfortunate thing that's kind of, it eliminates a lot of the options you guys may have to look at is there appears to be some evidence of wood rot, which means some of the wood members have retained moisture for a period of time, or this has been going on for a while. And instead of, for instance, doing like a simple surface clean and treat to salvage those members, the structural integrity and the level of rot is probably something that requires a little bit further remediation activity. In other words, possibly removal to address that.
So Greg,
Yes,
you were not on site, correct? You were not?
me personally, no.
Okay, because that wall that we're talking about where the rot was extensive, there was some real obvious flashing ears up above it, and water was coming from the top down for quite some time, so. But to remove and replace any areas like that should be an adequate cure for it, correct?
If you eliminate the moisture source and you eliminate the pathways, with the wall cavity, there's two things to consider, both in terms of short-term and long-term. If you want to look at it from, say, like a liability, or even from a potential employee or city occupant issue, from a health and safety standpoint, having the water in the wall cavity, if you don't eliminate that source, it will continue to grow and proliferate, which means it can become an odor source over time. And could be a potential issue, particularly for any individuals who have a pre-existing condition. Beyond that, what has to be factored in is where that water contamination is going. Typically, if it's staying within the wall cavity, that's one thing. If it's actually migrating down, depending on, like, say, your floor surface, as an example, say if you have a floor carpeting or carpet tile along the edge of perimeter walls, whether or not any other materials are being impacted. Normally, the only other thing, you start to get the bleed through, or it starts to show up on some of the interior surfaces of the wall board. Then it can obviously also get dispersed throughout the facility. Whether or not there's settled out spores, that is something that has to be addressed too, in terms of like how you best remediate or clean the area.
Okay, thanks. Anybody have any other questions for Greg? Okay.
Greg, Chief Lohmiller here. If we decide to move forward with the remodel, what process would it be to make sure that all of the mold or the fungi is not still existent in the building?
Yeah, so what I would recommend, and I understand that maybe there's one scenario might involve, like, say, some remodeling, and I don't know what the extent of the remodeling involved, but one of the things you do want to do is, and I highly emphasize this, is if or when, like, let's just say as an option, you decide that you're going to proceed with the remodeling, but now we've got to address some of the walls where this has been identified. Again, once the corrective measures are built into the equation, whether or not it's, for instance, a flashing or other sources or a combination, you do want to have the actual removal or remediation work ideally done or performed by an experienced fungal or mold remediation firm. The reason I say that is there's a lot of contractors out there that might be comfortable and their insurance allows them to proceed to do this. But it's what we often kind of look at and turn loosely in terms of the rip and tear method. What we want to avoid is that physical activity to remove the exterior wall members and sheathing and so on. We want to minimize or eliminate where we're physically disturbing and releasing spores out into the occupied portions of the building. So that said, you'd want to take appropriate precautions to look at temporary enclosure or containment of those areas and putting in some air, HEPA filtered air scrubbers to not only clean the air, but also to maintain that area under a slight negative pressure relative to, like, say, if fire department personnel are coming in for response, or I don't know if you have, emergency service out of there too, like ambulance or anything else. But those would be some precautions you'd want to take on behalf of the occupants. Beyond that, you'd have to look at where you separate your containment so you minimize how much cleaning needs to be done prior to reconstruction of those walls and reoccupancy down the line.
Okay.
Thank you. One more thing. So we have evidence of mold in that south end, but there's evidence of mold above, like the garage door headers and baseboard throughout the hallways. So there's a lot of areas that need to be looked at and taken care of before we can put everything back together. So the remodel is the whole entire building. Just so you know, I just didn't know if you knew that.
Okay.
Okay, Catherine, you
Yeah,
got
and what you'd want to look at, and again, there could be a variety of sources of some of those other areas that have some suspect discoloration or fungal. One of the things is just make sure you have the building properly assessed for where all there is some true or alleged fungal concern and what the sources are and how best to address it. Whether it could be cleaned and coated or if it's going to require physical removal or a combination thereof. So as part of the overall remodeling.
One more question.
Catherine,
What is
when
it?
you come up here, though, you got to do your name and
Oh,
your address.
I'm sorry. Catherine Funk, 14543 White Birch Lane, Cross Lake. I have a question for you. What does it cost per square foot for mold mediation?
Well, good question. Unfortunately, it's not like, say, asbestos abatement or lead where we can use some unit pricing. It really is widespread for the mold, and part of that is because it really depends on what methods are going to be used and techniques. As an example, if we can use a simple surface clean with a HEPA vacuum versus a wet cleaning and coating method or abatement, that would best be addressed by figuring out what we've got by material and location. Your wall cavities are another thing too, because you're talking a little bit more extensive. You're going to have to probably open those up from both interior and exterior. I don't know what the exterior envelope situation is like. Obviously, we know we've got interior, but to get access to those stud members and everything else, you're going to be impacting your exterior walls as well. So it could involve a little bit of construction effort and construction barriers and so on, because we're looking at the whole wall assembly. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully that answered your question. You really have to kind of look at the different areas and what will be required to really come up with an accurate cost estimate.
Can I ask a question of Andy? Andy, can you hear me?
Andy, you're muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I'm assuming you've heard everything that's gone on now.
Correct.
Do you have the staff, the equipment, and the technology to work with this?
Yeah, because we are remodeling the entire building, we don't have to necessarily worry as much about the, mold, airborne mold, contaminating the rest of the project. In those certain areas, we definitely take precautions and isolate that prior to proceeding with demolition. So, but it helps that we're renovating the entire space.
Thank you.
Is there anything here, Andy, that alarms you, or do you have any questions for Greg?
No, I think it just kind of summarized everything we've kind of known within the space, and obviously there is mold present, so we'll address each of those areas that and open up and make sure we clear out all of the areas within that building.
Okay, does anybody else have anything else from Greg? Ron, any other questions?
I have a question for Andy. Did they go into the fire hall or the administration building, whatever you want to call, and take out walls and take a look at what was there? I thought that was one of the things they were going to do.
Yeah, they didn't do it in its entirety, but they did open up areas. But Andy, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I suppose it's been a few weeks ago, we went in and opened up a few additional select areas where we knew that there was some additional water intrusion, majority of which was in the apparatus bay, and opened up that FRP and kind of exposed some of those walls to see if there was evidence of mold in those areas or not. There was some mold behind the FRP, but again, we just took off a few select areas.
Did you find a lot of wood rot then?
Majority of the wood rot that we found was at the overhead door headers. It wasn't rotted all the way through, but the first couple plates on the overhead door headers were rotted from the outside. The interior side, for the most part, was in good condition.
Okay, well, if nobody's got any other questions for Greg, I think we could let him go. If everybody's done. Greg, thanks much.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck to your team.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We'll see you. Take care, everyone.
Okay, now we move into the discussion of the fire hall plans. When did we shut down work? 2 months ago? Close. Yeah. Andy, how long have we been shut down? 2 months?
Yeah, pretty much 2 months.
Yeah. Okay, well, Dave, what do you have to say about it?
I guess what I'm doing, the thought that I had was just the last time you talked about this, you mentioned putting it on a ballot to get opinions, that would get a real opinion. I'm just wondering if we need to have, or take a little bit of time here to have more of a discussion with the public to educate them, ask them to come here and get their input on what we're doing.
It's off. I'm thinking we need to do a little more to educate the public. I don't know if they're picking up on everything that we see and say here. The cost, that type of thing. So I'm thinking that there might be an opportunity for us to figure out what the costs are. And I know that's going to be kind of hard for the remodel job, but figure out the costs, look at the pros and the cons, and then have a few times so that the public can come and ask questions and be educated on what we're doing, just so they know what the issues are that we're dealing with.
Okay, Marcia?
Well, I think we should find out for sure what the cost is going to be. I mean, we've had budget, projections or allowances or whatever they're talking about as far as what mold remediation would cost, and those were all projections. I think we needed to have it nailed down for the actual cost before we can even have the public come in, and if we don't have answers for accurate costs, then there's really no point in getting the public in here. We need to find out from High Tech exactly what it will cost to remodel that building into a fire station with the remediation of the mold and with any other things that that weren't in that original contract, that 1.3 million, I guess it was close to 1.3 million contract.
Karen?
If we take the time, Andy, how much time would you need realistically to come up with those numbers?
I don't know that it's time. We would need to open up the building and figure out what actually needs to be addressed. So you'd be spending more money to continue the demo, to figure out exactly what we need to do, and then we can price it accurately. But right now, with the building as is, there's no way for us to give a more accurate price than what we have already given.
If I remember back, I think you said it was around 100,000 to continue and open up and check, and that was a guesstimate on your part.
Correct.
Okay. And the numbers that you gave us on the estimate was running about 1.7 million, and that was supposed to be on the high end.
Correct. Those are budget numbers, correct?
Aaron, could we, excuse me, do you have this sheet, Mike? To see that the sheet we reviewed back on 8/6 showed 1,841 for cost. And I think what was missing in the 1.7 was the 100,000 for design engineering. Have we paid that? We did, because the design's done. So again, to what Marcia said, we need to nail down these costs before we can go. So
Even if we said today that we want to remodel, we still don't have the actual costs because we have this remediation and the extra costs for replacing the rotten wood, and I don't know what else was, I don't have that sheet, but what else they projected for costs. It's pretty substantial, the cost for doing that. And I just think that we need to have High Tech give us the actual cost. And you don't have to put the walls back up like you were concerned about before, right?
Put the walls back up.
Well, I mean, when they were going to take the walls down and investigate, and then they were going to put the walls back up because of the mold in the air and disturbing it. Wasn't that part of it, or maybe I misunderstood?
Well, I mean, if they're going to continue on the wall, we'll have to get back in the condition.
Yeah, I just thought that meant that they were going to enclose them again, and then it would be decided whether we do the.
In order for them to use the fire.
Yeah.
In order for them to use the fire hall, they would have to close it back up. Otherwise, they'd have to pull their equipment out. If I'm remembering right, Chief, they'd have to pull their equipment out and store it literally outside in order to have access to it. So
Right
that's
now,
where the cost went so high on it.
Okay, John, let's hear from you.
All right, so I'd take a different approach. I think we need a new firehouse. I think we need a commercial building. I think we're pouring good money out of bad. Actually, all the calls I've gotten have been 100% for a new firehouse. Some old timers who are aware of the construction of the current building, who knew the builder, who knew the situation, who followed it over a long time. So I think having a commercial building for Cross Lake would be ideal. I think it's going to be more functional than what we have. And so I would go for getting a new firehouse. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, now we're going to try to gather my thoughts. We had a group of citizens that spent, I'm going to say 4 months, and it could be either side of it, developing a plan for this building and for the fire hall. Through all of that, we came up with an option that was agreeable to everybody. Everybody agreed to do it. We got into the remodeling of the old city hall, and we found some areas with some mold in it. Andy kind of fact-checked me on this, but I think the identified areas of mold in that building was $28,800 to replace the south wall. It was about $76,000 in 3 different areas. Okay? We were at $1.3 million. We've got about 125 into the project now. So we got, for about, with the identified areas that we have to correct, we were back at about $1.3 million in costs. Now, we did have an allowance for another $300,000 or $400,000 on a worst case scenario to correct them moving forward. You're not going to know what those numbers are until you open them up. I mean, so if we're going to tell them to go open it up, then we're going to have more money into it for exploration. We've lost 2 months of good construction time in the summer. If we want to put this back for a referendum, or if we want to wait for the community to come in and do an inspection or to see what the numbers are, we're going to lose the season this year, the construction season. You know, there's no question about it. I think this whole thing, the mold, everything about it has been totally blown out of proportion trying to build a new fire hall. And I'm really upset that we lost 2 months of construction. I think we should just move forward and continue what we all agreed to do and fix any areas and look into any other areas that need fixing. Anything with mold, anything with water. We talked about the roof trusses being 4 foot on center. In actuality, they're 2 foot on center. The construction of that building, there's nothing wrong with it. And the more we dig into it, the more we realize that there's nothing wrong with it. So I think we should just get going, get the thing done, and know that we're going to have some unforeseens, know that we got to work with high tech, and I think, Andy, you would be willing to open books and work together on the areas. You've already given us an outline of what the costs are. Is that true?
That's correct, yep. We'd have to work together on it because there's so many unknowns that we would need to uncover and make decisions and you know, be willing to spend some money to correct these issues.
But are you, I mean, I'm pretty confident that we've covered stuff and we've kind of attached numbers to them. Are you equally as confident that we have done that?
Yes, I think we went through all of the areas of either potential or known issues and applied budgetary costs to address and correct those issues.
So now it's just identifying them as we move forward and agreeing or disagreeing that, you know, yeah, it truly does need to be done and this is the number for it, but we've got an outside number for them.
Correct.
So
it's not going to exceed that 1.7.
well, you can never, when you're into a rebuttal, you can never ask anybody not to exceed. I mean,
Okay.
That's just an unfair question.
Okay, we do have a contract with High Tech to remodel at 1.298 million. So we do have a contract to remodel.
Yeah, and now we've got a change order, and we may have a couple more that we've got to be willing to accept. We've got guidelines for those change orders. So, you know, they're not going to blindside us with anything. So I just think, you know, really we should just stop all this, make a motion to move forward, try to get this thing buttoned up before the snow flies too deep, and forget it all happened. I mean, this last 2 months has been crazy. Go ahead, Chip.
Just your comments are making me a little upset because you think that what that report says is there's nothing wrong with that building. That mold is true. That fungus is true. It wasn't airborne because nobody was in there. So you're saying you want to spend $1.3 million and not address the no vapor barrier in the apparatus bay, the mold behind the RFP in the apparatus bay, the mold in the hallways. You don't want to touch any of that.
Chip, I never said I didn't want to address anything. I said everything has been identified
Right.
with the number by it.
But your number is keep going down to 1.3. You're not saying
That's what we are
1.76.
identified today, but we've got, I said, up to 1.7 or whatever.
Okay,
the final
I just want to make sure that you state that you'll spend
Yeah,
1.7.
absolutely. I don't
Okay.
want to skip anything.
Okay, good, because I don't want you to put a Band-Aid on the mold and say we're done, because we won't have any firefighters. Recruiting firefighters coming to a building that's damaged or has mold, we won't have anybody there. I'm just letting you know.
Agree with and
You should
respect that.
think about the future, not today.
I think you maybe misunderstood. I was just asking if that contract was approved at 1.3 is in place, and we realize that change orders are going to take place to the tune of, and that was just projections. What I'm asking for is actual figures, but I guess I don't have a problem with making a motion to move forward with the remodel of the administration building into the fire hall.
Okay, so you're going to make that motion?
Yes, I just did.
Okay? Then I'm going to second that motion, and let's open it up for discussion. Okay, go ahead.
I would really appreciate if that, in this motion, that you add that throughout the continuation of the build and the remodel, that all air sampling and wall, any type of fungus that is seen has to be looked at, discovered, and taken care of, not by a service master, by a company that is certified licensed through the state of Minnesota for this type of situation.
The remediation or the identification?
Identification, remediation, to know exactly what it is, how to get rid of it, and do it correctly the right way.
Won't that be part of high-tech's change order?
So. Andy, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, and I agree, you know, as far as high-tech side of it, we would also want a firm commitment from the city that, you know, any issue that arises, that we address it properly, you know, and not leave something in the building that, you know, either we're not comfortable with or, you know, any mold remediation company wouldn't be comfortable with. So we would also want that commitment as well.
Andy, through all of the interaction that you and I have had together on this project from day one, has there ever been any indication of not wanting to do a 100% job on this?
No, there has not. I agree with you.
Have I not at all times said that we're going to turn every stone and we're going to find out what it is and we're going to correct it?
Nope, that is exactly how our conversations have been, and that's why I feel comfortable.
Anything up or doing, you know, well.
Andy, if I could ask a question, how long would it be before you have, if this motion passes, how long would it be before you have people back on site?
Right now, we've committed some of our labor after getting shut down. We've committed some of our labor to some other projects. If you gave us approval to proceed with the renovation, we could get back in there, you know, within the probably middle of September, either the week of the 14th or the week of the 21st to jump back in.
So roughly a couple of weeks, roughly.
Yeah.
I think along with that motion, if this is to go through, I think that the building committee kind of put me in charge of the go-between guy on both of these projects. And this fire hall, I have been totally bypassed on it. So I think we need to reinstate that portion of it too. And I think, Andy, kind of correct me here, but I think you're going to need somebody with answers and quick answers, right? Or if they stumble on something in a wall and they need to fix it, they need somebody to say, yeah, fix it, without having a special council meeting or something. So I'm going to ask you to authorize me to be that person to go with them.
That'd be a separate motion. Let's deal with the one that's on the table first, please.
All right. Okay, so we got a motion and a second on to continue on with the construction.
So I've got some thoughts on this. I think it's irresponsible for anybody that's in the council right now to proceed with this contract without having a not-to-exceed number that'll cover everything that it's going to take to do this work. Period. I'm not going to vote for something with taxpayers' money to say, hey, you know, if we're buying a $10,000 lawnmower, that's one thing. But here you're spending $1.5 million or more. I just don't understand it, how you can sit up there and say that. The other thing I'd like to find is out that there's no recourse from high-tech when their employees are working in this new building and they're remodeling. From what I heard from Braun, they said every time you open up a wall, you better be wearing the right equipment and taking precautions so that whatever you find doesn't spread to other areas of the building. I haven't heard them say that. I don't want to have the city come back and have the city sued because some precaution wasn't taken. And it's foolish to go ahead without having a not-to-exceed number, period, and I guess you can understand that I think spending the money that we're spending on remodeling is foolish.
Okay.
But is the not to exceed would be that 1.7?
Well, Marcia, Andy, I'll let you answer that.
Oh. I guess it's hard to answer that because we don't know what's behind those walls. If you want us to put together a price that all of the studs are rotten behind those walls and do a not to exceed on that, otherwise we just don't know what, we don't know. So I don't know how, what part do you want me to price certain scenarios where we're replacing half of the studs in the wall cavity? I guess I just don't know how we could price that without knowing what the extent of the damage is.
But you have put some money in there to work some areas. You've got.
Yeah, we have an educated guess to open it up and expose it, and some fixes to it, but it's hard to put a price on something that you don't know what you actually have to do to fix it.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to, it's gonna be.
Can I just make one comment? I think that, going back to the comment about we all got on board for this building, and we did all get on board for the fire hall, but when things change like this, I think we have to understand it's okay to change your plans. You don't have to plow ahead. I mean, if you're on a trip and going down the road and the road's washed out, I guess you got to turn around and regroup and figure out a new plan. And that's what we're trying to do today. That's just, I think, there's been comments from Chip about the firefighters are leery. We're all leery about this.
The longer this goes on, the more leery everybody's gonna get.
I just don't want to make a decision just because of schedule and speed, I think Chip's got things he's got alternative places figured out what he can do if it takes a little longer. And he has talked about he's going to have to move the equipment out, so it'll just be a few more months if we delay it. But I think we want to do this thing right, and I do think we want to do something that's going to be around for years in the city of Cross Lake, well beyond when we're here.
Dave, I want you to understand a couple things, I guess, from personally. I'm not in favor of a new fire hall, so I'm going to state that openly right here. I think we have pushed this thing off to a point to where things are, it's just, I feel like it's just trying to be shoved down my throat. Okay, I've reached that point, and I'm frustrated with it, because I think this should be back under construction, and we should be well underway from where we are. And I'm giving you a personal opinion, Dave.
Right. Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Have you looked at the cost sheet and understand the costs in the life? Do you understand the sheet that Mike put together? Or
Dave, the last office I had when I worked before building before that, I guess, when they would shampoo the carpet in my office, they'd pull oil up through the carpeting, because that happened to be the spot where Public Works changed oil in their cars before the police department got moved in. And I worked in it every day. Did I like it? No. Did I appreciate it? No, I didn't. I was very happy to move out. But I worked in that building for 12 years that way.
But I guess the question I had was, do you understand the costs
Yes, I do.
of a new building and the life of a new building, and the cost of remodeling and the life of a remodel building, and what liability would be placed on whoever's here in 20 years or so? That's all I'm asking. It's either a yes or a no.
I got a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion on it?
So I just have a question for Marcia, because you said you thought your motion included a not to exceed. Does it include a not to exceed 1.7, or does it or doesn't it?
I didn't include that. So, if you want to amend the motion not to exceed, but High Tech is saying that that's difficult to do, so.
So there's no exceed?
No.
It's just.
You can't
Go
ask
ahead and remodel. That's the motion?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And use the guidelines that have been brought to us. That should be part of it too, is the guidelines that was laid out to us, that's what we're gonna use. Oh, to use the guidelines that was laid out by High Tech for costs. Okay, so we got a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-2. Okay, Chip, go ahead.
I will need council approval to find further different location for my fire trucks during the construction. How much would you be willing to pay for that monthly? Andy, do you know how long I'll need to get the fire equipment out of the apparatus bays during your construction?
I would say 3 weeks.
Okay, so while you're doing the demo of the other part, you're going to be able to shut off the air to the apparatus band where I do my work, so we don't have to worry about any contamination, correct?
Correct. We'd be able to isolate that off.
So it'll take you 3 weeks to do the sealing, all the RFP, all that stuff in the apparatus bay, correct? And the
Correct.
headers? And the beam, the metal beam? I just want to get a full timeline here.
If you want to say it's probably a full month.
Okay.
By the time we get all that redone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now how are we going to proceed is another question. I would like the council to support me in being the go-to guy from High Tech on cost issues and construction of what's going on.
I need to get an answer on how much money I can spend for...
Why don't you come back to us with what it's going to cost? I mean, I'd tell you to spend $500. You know, it's a little more fair. Figure out if you can find something and come back. I'm sure we're going to work it out.
Mr. Mayor, I don't understand why you asked him to come back with a cost and you just approved a motion with no cost, not to exceed. I'm totally at a loss here on what's going on.
I don't have a clue. You've looked into it. You know, I don't know what it is. $5,000. I mean, it's just throwing a number right to the sky. So we're going to have to work it out. Okay. So moving forward, how are we going to handle any interchanges between High Tech and the council? Are we going to call a special meeting every time something comes up? Or are you going to authorize me to be the guy, the go-between guy?
I think that you have already been authorized by the council to do that.
So Andy, how would you like to see that work? You're on mute, yeah.
On other projects with cities, you know, they've approved up to a certain value where you work through issues up to that amount. If it exceeds that amount, then it goes to council approval. You know, or we could look at a time material basis for some of the issues that come up. We're open to whatever you guys want to do.
What would be the amount that you would want to see a quick turnaround response to?
I guess that's up to you guys, what you want to feel comfortable with. I mean, we're going to deal with some pretty hefty dollar amounts, you know, thus the budget. You know, so there's going to be some fairly substantial cost potentially into some of this.
So maybe we should just get where we have special meetings and get council approval. That's fine too. I'm just trying to not delay things. So it doesn't matter to you how we do it?
No, I mean, if you guys are comfortable doing special meetings, otherwise we just want to make sure that we're not holding up progress anymore. You know, right now we're against the clock of Mother Nature and winter conditions. So trying to get in the ground and get everything moving, we're going to need quick responses on issues as they arise.
So a special council meeting is 3 days notification?
Yeah,
Right.
why don't we decide on an amount?
And believe me, whatever it is will be reported back quickly. There's not going to be anything hidden, but it's just the go ahead and get going.
I think you've got to have somebody that can make decisions. In my years, you know, and a lot of these are road or sewer projects, if they run into a problem, the engineer and Ted and myself, you make a decision and you count on the council to back you if it's something that has to be done. So you're not sitting here, oh, we got to call a special meeting, Char's got to post it for 3 days, and you're holding up the contractor. I think, you know, come up with a figure. If it's over $25,000, it goes to a special meeting other than, and whatever the figure is, have somebody that can make a decision. Your city administrator and Chip ought to be heavily involved in this project and have one council person, and that's sort of the committee that, you know, is going to oversee the project and deal with anything that comes up. And if it's, you know, a major thing, yeah, then you call a special meeting.
Yeah, okay, so.
I agree with Tom. The three of you take care of it and move forward, but Andy needs to make sure that all three of you get equal notice, and then move on.
Okay. So that should be is that a motion? Do we have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on it?
What was the motion? Is there a dollar amount with that?
I can't.
A dollar
She
amount?
wants you to restate the motion.
Dollar amount?
Can you restate the motion?
Just restate the motion.
Restate the motion. My motion is for mayor, for Mike Linus, and the fire chief to work in conjunction and make the decisions. And if we need, do we need a dollar figure, guys? I don't think so. I think they're going to be reasonable, the three of them.
Still a second.
Okay, so we got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All in favor. Okay, Andy, do you need anything else from us?
No, I guess from here, I guess we should probably set up a meeting with our group and just, you know, figure out where we left everything off and get a game plan on how we're going to handle whether it be equipment or you know, how we're going to phase the construction and all that. So I think in the near future here we should get together and discuss all that.
Okay, you name it. You know, do you want to do it here or down there? Or?
Yeah, we can do it at city council and just roll the plans out and run back through everything and yeah, get this thing started back up.
Okay, let's try to do it first part of the week. And can you call and just tell us when you're available to come up?
Yep, sounds good.
I'm sure at least two of us will be available.
Okay, I'll send out email and get something out there.
Okay, thank you much. Anything else? We got to close this meeting for a closed session. Move into a closed session meeting now.
So moved.
Closed session.
Okay,
Recess this meeting, moved into closed session.
and you gonna second that, John?
I'll second, whatever.
Motion and a second, all in favor? Aye.